Welcome back to On the Same Page. We are on Daf Chaf Ches Amud Aleph, 28a of Maseches Kiddushin. We are starting 7 lines down on the page. The Gemara has been discussing the concept of Gilgul Shvuah, of rolling over an oath. In other words, if a person is already obligated to take an oath in court, then once he's taking one oath, the Beis Din, the court, can require him to swear on things that he may not have been obligated to swear on otherwise. So the Gemara asks, Ad Heichon Gilgul Shvuah? How far does this concept go? How extreme of an oath would we make a person take in court once they're already taking a different oath that they are obligated in? So Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav, De Amar Le Hishav Ali Shein Avdi Ata. Even as far as if the claimant, the one making the claim, would say, he made a claim, the defendant responded, and it was such a case where he now has to take an oath on that. Well, once he's taking an oath that he's obligated in, so now even if the person making the claim adds another claim and he says, I want you to swear that you are not my slave. So even then, the person would have to swear, take an oath, that he is not the guy's slave. That was the answer of Yehuda said in the name of Rav. The Gemara says, that can't be. Hahu shamusi mishamtinan le. If somebody would make such an accusation of another person, we would put them in chayr, we would excommunicate them. Ditanya, we learning a brayso, or ditnan, I think it's a mishnah. We're learning a Mishnah, Hakare lechaveiro eved, if a person calls his friend an eved, a slave, if he accuses him of being a slave, so, that's slander. That could affect the person's ability to function in society. So that's a terrible thing. Yehei benidoi, the person gets excommunicated, the one who made such an accusation. So we don't let him just decide in court to say, you're swear to me that you're not a slave. Such a claim is something that's over the line. The Brisa continues. It says, what if he says mamzer? He says you're a mamzer. You were born from an illicit marriage. So if somebody makes such an accusation, sofeg asar he gets 40. He gets lashes. This is the Torah requires lashes in certain cases. This is rabbinic. This is what we call makas mardus, for rebellious behavior. The rabbis can impose malchus, lashes, and if somebody accuses someone else of being a mamzer for no reason, then with no basis, then he gets malchus. And if he says Rasha, if he says the guy's a Rasha, he's a wicked person, he accuses someone of that, so Yored imo lechayev. So in that situation, the court doesn't get involved, but the person who was accused of being a Rasha actually now has the right to kind of push back and make trouble for the other person. Yored imo lechayev. He can descend into his life, meaning he can make things difficult. The examples that Rashi gives here are that he's allowed to hate the guy, and he can try to impact the person's parnasa, the person's livelihood, by, let's say, opening up a shop next to him that's of the same thing, even though normally that could be problematic. But in this case, that will be permitted. If somebody calls another person a Rasha, we say that's such a terrible act that the person who was accused, the person who was called a Rasha, now has a right to respond in a way that impacts and hurts the other person. Okay, so all of that is to say that it can't be, when we asked how far does a Gilgul Shvuah go, how far can we take it to make a guy swear, it can't be that it's a fair example to say that even if he accuses someone of the other guy being an eved, a slave, he has to swear to that, because you're not allowed to make such an accusation. We would put somebody in excommunication if you would make such an accusation. Now that's all true when we say eved, we mean a slave, we mean a non-Jewish slave. So he's accusing the person of being descended from a eved Kanani, a Canaanite slave. So that can't be the case. But Ela Amar Rabba, so rather Rabba says, what's the case? Hishav ali shelo nimkarta li be'eved ivri. I want you to swear that you didn't sell yourself to me as an Eved Ivri, as a Jewish slave. Now that we could require a Gilgul Shvua. That we could require him to swear that he never sold himself as a Jewish slave. That's not like there's nothing wrong with being a Jewish slave, so to speak. It's not like being an Eved, where that affects your lineage, and an Eved Kanani is not even Jewish. But to say he's an Eved Ivri, that you're allowed to make such an accusation, or you're allowed to at least demand that the person swear that he's not an Eved Ivri, he's not a Jewish slave. The Gemara says, of course. Why? We asked Ad Heichan, how far does it go? You think that's an example of taking it so far? Haytana Sameal Yasi. That's a good claim. If he thinks, if it might be true, so then what's wrong with that claim? Mamona is Gabe. He has the other guy's money. In other words, if Ruvain, let's say, accuses Shimon, Shimon already is swearing to Ruvain that he doesn't owe him money for some reason. Now, so Ruvain says, I also want you to swear that you didn't sell yourself to me as an Eved Kanani. Now, he wouldn't pull that out of, as an Eved Ivri, as a Jewish slave. He wouldn't pull that out of thin air. That's apparently, a possibility. So why wouldn't we make him swear? He owes him money, so to speak. He sold himself, which means he owes him the work that he sold himself for. So what's novel about that? Of course he would swear with a Gilgul Shvua. Once he's swearing on one thing, he could swear on that too. So Gemara explains Rava l'taimei. Now this would be Rava, giving this answer, would be working within his own reasoning. Da'amar Rava, because Rava had said previously, Eved Ivri gufo kanoi. Rava holds that when Eved Ivri sells himself, he's not just selling his work, he's actually selling his body. It's temporary, but he becomes, the property of the purchaser, of the master. And that, that's not just that he owes him money, that's actually that he's now the person's property. So that's novel, that's a Chiddush that we would say he's ad heicham Gilgul Shvua. How far do we take it that even if he was accused of that he wanted the guy to swear that he didn't sell himself as an Eved Ivri, which according to Rava means he sold, it's not just he owes him money, he sold his own body, he's now the property of the other guy, that even that we would make him swear. It's not just a regular claim of metaltalin, of movable goods, of money, but it's more than that. And yet we would make him swear about that. The Gemara says, Ihachi hainu karka. But if so, that's karka, that's land. We equate the ownership of a slave with the ownership of land in halacha. So the Mishnah said that that was the whole thing that got this started. Normally you don't swear on karka, you don't swear on land. The Mishnah said if you're swearing on metaltalin, on movable objects, you'll also swear on land. So included in that is the ownership of property of an Eved Ivri, if you hold that that's property. So it's still, what's novel about that? We know we roll over Shvua, a oath about land, so we can roll over this oath, which is about the equivalent of land, the ownership of an Eved Ivri. So what's novel? How is this the answer to the question at Heichan? How far do we take it? Why is this taking it further than the Mishnah took it? When it said we would roll over an oath about land, so we roll over an oath about the ownership of a slave, that you have to swear about that too. So the Gemara explains, Ma'u detema, what would I have said? Why is this novel? Because I would have said, Karkahu Davidi inshi de mizbini bitzina. Because when it comes to land, it's normal to sell land in secret. Backroom deals. Or just in private, really. You can sell land in private and not everybody's going to know about it. So, im isa de zavin, if it was true that it was sold, last like we wouldn't know about it. And that's why we're making him swear, because one guy's saying it happened, he's denying it, but we have no way of knowing, so we would make him swear, we would roll over that shvua, that oath. But when it comes to the sale of an Eved Ivri, im isa de zavin, if it was true that he had sold himself, Kala Islay, there would be a cold. People would know about it. And so, it must be that it never happened. So if it never happened, why are we making him swear? So you might have thought that we don't make him swear. Kamash Malan, Rava comes and says, no, ad heichang, how far does it go? Even this we will make him swear. Even though it's very unlikely that this ever happened. And so why do we have to make him swear that it didn't happen? It's so unlikely. If he really sold himself as an Eved Ivri, we would know about it. There's a cult. The word goes out. Word gets out about it. So now that he's being accused of it, we shouldn't make him swear, because if it had happened, we would have heard about it. So you might have thought that we don't make him swear. Kamash Malan comes Rava and says, no, we would still make him swear. That's how far Gilgul Shvua goes. Even if something seems so unlikely, we would still require him to swear about it. Okay. New Mishnah. The Mishnah says, Klanase damim be'acher, kivan shezacha zeh, nischayev zeh bechalifav. So this line of the Mishnah is going to be, it's a little bit of a confusing line. The Gemara is going to consider a number of possibilities as to what it means. But for now, we'll say, Klanase damim be'acher. Anything that becomes value, that's given value, let's say, kivan shezacha zeh, if you are going to use it in an exchange. So this Mishnah is actually discussing kinyan chalipin, bartering, trading. So we've talked a lot about different types of kinyanim, ways of acquisition. We've talked about kinyan chalipin. The way kinyan chalipin works is a person takes an object. It doesn't even have to be worth a shava pruta. It doesn't have to be worth anything, really. It could be a cheap handkerchief, and that's actually the common thing. He takes it, he gives it to the other person, and when the other person receives it and is kona it, so then whatever he's exchanging it for now becomes the other guy's. So I want to buy your cow, I give you my handkerchief, you lift up the handkerchief, and the cow becomes mine at that moment. And that's called kinyan chalipin. It's not working with the value of the object, because it's not the value. When a person makes a purchase with money, which we actually will talk about it a little bit in this Gemara, but we paskin that mos are not konos. Mos, money, doesn't affect a transaction. If I give you money for your cow, and you pick up the money and you go, oh, you're kona, the cow's not mine yet. I only get the cow once I actually pull it towards me. But chalipin does work to affect the transaction. If I give you a handkerchief and you lift it up, now we're bartering. I'm not selling, we're now bartering, and this type of kinyan works. Chalipin works. So the Mishnah says, Kol hanase damim ba'acher, anything that is treated with a value, kivan shezacha zeh, once the recipient receives it, nischayev zeh bechalifav, he becomes obligated to give over the exchange item. The exchange item now becomes the property of the other person. Keitzad. So what's an example of this? The Mishnah says, Hichlef shor b'para, if a person traded an ox for a cow, o chamor b'shor, or he traded a donkey for an ox, kivan shezacha zeh, once one of them pulled and took possession of one of the things being exchanged, nischayev zeh b'chalifav, he becomes obligated to give the other one. In other words, I think the words nischayev zeh b'chalifav actually means a little bit different than what I'm saying. What it means is, as soon as let's say I'm giving you, what were the examples? It's a shor for a para, an ox for a cow. So I give you my ox. The cow is in the barn, right? It doesn't have to even be here. The cow is in the barn. As soon as I give you the ox and you take possession, nischayev zeh b'chalifav, that now belongs to me, and I'm chayev for whatever happens to it. I'm responsible for if anything happens to it, wherever it is, because it's now mine. So that's what it means. It means that when I give you my ox, and you take possession of it, the cow is now mine wherever it is. That's how chalipin works. The transaction has taken place, even though I haven't pulled the cow towards me. You pulled the bull, or the ox. Now that cow is mine. So that's what the Mishnah says. So the Gemara asks, Chalipin mainihu. What are we talking about here in the beginning of the Mishnah? As I said, it's kind of a difficult line to read. The Mishnah says, K'anase damim ba'acher, anything that's treated with value by others, once kivan shezacha zeh nischayev zeh b'chalifa, when one of them takes possession, when the recipient of the object takes possession, the giver now is responsible for whatever he's exchanging for, wherever it might be. So what is it referring to? Matbeya? Is it referring to a coin? That I can give you the coin. I'm not using it in the sense of purchase. What if I want to use the coin as barter, not as purchase? So I can use it as currency and buy something, but we said Ma'os is not Konos. That doesn't work to affect the transaction. If I give you the money and you pick it up, the cow is not mine yet. I have to pull the cow. But Chalipin does work. So what if I use the money not as in the sense of a purchase, but as Chalipin? I'll give you the money, and you'll pick it up. You'll treat it like the cow, like the bull that you're pulling. Instead of pulling the bull, you'll be picking up currency, but you don't look at it as the currency value. You look at it as some copper coins or gold coins, pieces of gold. So the Gemara says, are you telling me that you can do Chalipin with matbeya, with a coin? Shma mina matbeya nase Chalipin? Are we going to learn from here that you can use a coin, you can use currency in an exchange of Chalipin? That can't be. We know that you can't. It's a Mishnah in Bava Metzia. That matbeya, a coin, a currency, cannot be used in an exchange, in a transaction of Chalipin. So what is it talking about when it says Kol nase damin ba'achim, whatever is given value? So what is the beginning of the Mishnah talking about? So Amar Rabbi Yehuda says Hachi Ka'amar. This is what it's saying. Kol nishum damim ba'acher. Anything that you want to give instead of money to use for Chalipin. So it's evaluated. Nishum dambach. Anything that you evaluate the value, because you're not paying with money, you want to pay with metaltalin, with other movable objects. So you're basically bartering, but with movable objects. Kivan, top of the next page. Kivan shezachazeh nischai b'chalipin. As soon as the recipient of the object is zochang it, takes it. So then the person giving the object now becomes responsible for whatever he is exchanging for. So it can be anything. It could be, the Mishnah is going to give examples of animals, but I can give you an animal. When you take possession of the ox, so the cow becomes mine. So anything that we can evaluate as and give a monetary value to, can be used as Chalipin. Now, what is this trying to bring out? What's the Chiddush? What's it telling me? Again, we're going to get into it more in this Gemara, but there is an opinion that Chalipin can actually only be done with kalim, with vessels, but not with with other things, other types of metaltalin that aren't vessels. So fruit, or maybe animals. So this would be telling us, in the beginning of the Mishnah, it's telling you anything, not just kalim, not just vessels, but even other things, if they can be given a value, once one of them has, once the recipient has taken it, so the transaction occurs, and the giver, the person giving over the object, now takes possession of the other thing, and if anything happens to it, it's his problem. It's his responsibility. And Dekonami, we can infer this from the Mishnah that we're not talking about currency, as we thought at first. Dekotani, because the Mishnah goes on and it teaches, and it gives an example. It says, Keitzad, what's the case? Hechlev shar b'para o chamor b'shar. If you trade a ox for a cow, or a donkey for an ox. So we see that we're not talking about currency here, being used as Chalipin. Shma mina, we learn from here that we're talking about movable objects. Now the Gemara is going to go through from here to Mishnah a exploration of, so what did we think when we thought it was matbeya? How did we think? I mean, isn't that obvious if you continue to read the Mishnah? It gives an example. It's an ox and a donkey. So why did we think that it was coins that were being exchanged? What was the Gemara thinking when it originally thought, do we see from here that you can use currency as Chalipin? how did it think to read the Mishnah? That's what the Gemara now asks. According to what we originally thought, that we would learn from this Mishnah that currency can be used for a exchange of chalipin, a transaction using chalipin. What did my Ketzad? What was the example of the donkey? How did that fit in? So the Gemara says, Hachi Kamar, this is what it would be saying. Peiros nami avdi chalipin. It would be adding that fruit. Again, fruit here doesn't mean just fruit. It means non-kalim, non-vessels. So animals, not only live animals, but animal meat even is like fruit. It's just metaltalin. So all of that can be used in chalipin. And the Mishnah would read, you can use a matbeya, you can use currency for a chalipin, and then it would go on and say, and you can use fruit, non-kalim, non-vessels in chalipin. And then it gives examples, Ketzad. And here the Gemara, when it gives the example, it goes and it says, let's just see it, Ketzad, so what's the case? Hichlif bisar shar b'para. If a person exchanged even, not just an animal itself, but even just the meat of an animal for a cow, the meat of an ox for a cow, bisar chamor b'shar, or the meat of a donkey for an ox. I'm not sure what they would do with the meat of the donkey. It's not kosher, but maybe for the skin, I don't know, for tanning, I don't know what, but that's just the example it gives. So kevan shezacha zeh nischaya b'chalipin, and the Mishnah will be saying once the recipient receives it, so then the giver is now responsible for that which he exchanged. In other words, he acquires that what he is exchanging it for. So if he gave ox meat, as soon as the recipient picks up the ox meat, so the giver of the ox meat now has acquired the cow. So the Mishnah, according to this, is reading as follows. Again, this is all according to what we would have thought, what we thought originally, when the Gemara thought that the Mishnah was talking about a matbeya, that you could do chalipin with currency. Then how does it flow then into this discussion about exchanging oxen for cows? So it would read that you can do anything that you can give value to, such as like currency, can be used in chalipin, and also peiros, also fruit, non-kalim, any movable object could be used for chalipin, and it gives the example of exchanging ox meat for a cow and donkey meat for a ox. The Gemara says, Hanichol Rav Sheshes to Amar Peiros Avdi Chalipin. This can fit well within the opinion of Rav Sheshes. Rav Sheshes holds that fruit can be used for chalipin. Non-kalim can be used for chalipin, so that could be what the Mishnah is teaching. Elul Rav Nachman Damar Peiros Lo Avdi Chalipin. But according to Rav Nachman, who holds that you can't use peiros for a chalipin, you can't use fruit in a chalipin exchange. Ma yikola meimar. So what can you say? How are you going to explain the Mishnah again according to the Havamina, according to what we thought? What would the Mishnah be saying? It gives the example of currency, and then it talks about cows and oxen and donkey, but you can't use those according to Rav Nachman for chalipin. So what is it saying? So the Gemara says, Hachi ka'amar, this is what it would be saying. Yesh damim shehein kechalipin. There are situations where money is like chalipin. You can have a scenario where you can make an exchange with money like chalipin. Ketzad. In other words, just to take a step back, according to Rav Nachman, it would seem, if you can't use peiros, if you can't use fruit, if you can't use non-kalim, non-vessels for chalipin, you also wouldn't be able to use currency. So really the whole Mishnah needs a reinterpretation. We thought that was talking about currency, but obviously not in the classic case of chalipin, because Rav Nachman holds that you can't even use peiros, you can't even use movable objects for a chalipin, only kalim, only vessels. So it wouldn't make sense to say that you can use currency, and also it's difficult to read how do you read the whole Mishnah? What kind of exchange is going on here? So So hachi ka'amar, this is what it would be saying. Yesh damim shehem kichalipin. There are situations where you can buy something with money, but it will function like chalipin. Meaning, even though normally ma'os are not konos, we don't allow a person to make an exchange to affect the transaction using cash. And again, like I said before, when I give you cash to buy something, even when you accept the cash, the object is not yet mine until I pull it to me. That's normally, as opposed to chalipin, where as soon as you take it, the object becomes mine. But sometimes there is a case, Rav Nachman will say, the Mishnah is telling you there is a case where money will work like chalipin. It will affect the transaction. So what's the case? Keitzad, hichlif demei shar b'para, o demei chamar b'shar. The Mishnah goes on to explain the cases where you trade the value of a donkey for a cow, or the value of the value of an ox for a cow, or the value of a donkey for an ox. So what's the case though? What is he saying? So Rashi explains for us, the case is that a person, let's use names, Ruvain sold an ox to Shimon for 1 mana, and Shimon pulled the ox. So now he owes the mana. He owes him the money for it. So Shimon now owes Ruvain a mana for the ox. Now Ruvain, the seller, says, do you have a cow to give me instead of the money? Instead of the money, you could give me a cow. So the guy says, yeah, I have it. So they evaluate the cow. It's worth a mana. And so perfect. So now the seller says, you owe me money right now. The money that you owe me will be the money that I pay you for the cow. So that will work, and the cow will now belong to the seller. So, in other words, we'll just do the case one more time. Ruvain sells an ox to Shimon. Shimon owes him, let's say we'll use $100 for the ox. Ruvain now says, instead of giving me $100, do you have a cow that you can give me? So he says, I do have a cow. But the cow doesn't become instantly his, because they didn't originally make a deal of chalipin. And actually, according to Rav Nachman, they couldn't, because Rav Nachman holds you can't do chalipin with animals or peiros, with non-kalim. So right now, Ruvain sold an ox to Shimon. Shimon took possession of the ox. He owes money for it. He has a cow that he wants to give instead of the money. So they say like this, Ruvain says, I owe you, now, you owe me that cow. How is the cow going to become mine? So the money that you owe me, instead of paying me the money, you'll take that money, you'll keep it in exchange for the cow. And now the cow can become Ruvain's without him even making a transaction. The money that was owed is being used to pay for the cow. And even though normally ma'os are not konos, usually when someone takes possession of money, it doesn't flip the other thing to him. In this case, it will. When Shimon now takes possession of the money, he owes Ruvain money, but now he's saying, I'm going to keep the money, I'm going to take possession of it, and the cow will become yours. That is going to work, and the transaction will take effect, and the cow will become Ruvain's. Question is why? Why does the money in that case work to acquire the cow? Well, if I just hand you money, I can't acquire the cow without actually pulling the cow towards me. So the Gemara explains, my timer, what's the reason? Because Savar like Rabbi Yochanan, because he holds like Rabbi Yochanan, Amar Dvar Torah Mos Konos. According to Rabbi Yochanan, really by Torah law, money does affect a transaction. According to the Torah, when I give you the $100 for the cow, and you take the $100, the cow is now mine. I don't have to make a kinyan on it. I don't have to pull it towards me to make it mine. It's mine as soon as you take the money. That's by Torah law. However, the rabbis came along and said, you can't do that. We're not going to let that work. In order for the cow to become yours, you actually have to pull it towards you. Umatam amru mashicha koneh. Why did they say that the money is not koneh, the money does not acquire, but rather mashicha? Pulling it is what's koneh. Gezerah, because they made a gezerah, they were concerned basically. Shema yomar lo, maybe the seller will say, Yinisrafu chitacha ba'aliyah. Your wheat burned in the attic. In other words, the rabbi said, if as soon as you give over the money, the property, it belongs to the buyer now, but where is it? It's still in the hands of the seller. Is the seller going to take good care of it? Probably not, because he has nothing to lose. It's not even his. So if the seller has the storehouse of wheat, the buyer comes, Reuven comes, he gives him, $1,000 for the wheat. Right now it's still in the storehouse. A fire breaks out. So the seller says, I don't need to put out the fire. I have nothing to lose. It belongs to him already. What do I gain from putting it out? So we don't want that. Right? Imagine nowadays, right? We buy something from online, and if it's mine, as soon as I pay for it, then the seller won't take care of it. They won't. Who says they'll even ship it, right? So the rabbi said that the exchange of money doesn't affect the transaction. It doesn't become mine until I get it and I pull it towards me. However, explains the Gemara, Milsa de Shliach Gazur Barabarim. A situation that's common, that's where the Gezerah exists, meaning a normal transaction. They only, in general, the rabbi's decrees apply to common situations. So the normal way to make a purchase with money is to give the guy money, and then in exchange, you get an object. So that's where they said that's not going to work to affect the transaction. Mos are not konos. When you give money, it does not affect the transaction. But situations that are not common, they did not decree against. And so a purchase with money that's a weird, abnormal type of purchase was not included in the Gezerah, was not included in the decree, and in that case, Mos would be konos. In that case, the money could affect the transaction. And therefore, in our case, where it's not a normal way to buy something with money, because we're using money that's owed. Reuven sold an ox to Shimon. Shimon took the ox, he didn't pay for it yet, he now owes money. Instead of paying the money, he wants to pay a cow. So they say, just the money that you owe will be the purchase money for the cow. So in that case, that's not the normal way to pay for something with money. Usually when you pay for something with money, you give the money. Here, he already has the money. So in that case, we go back to the biblical law, the Torah law, that Mos is konos. Mos works, money can affect the transaction, and he just keeps the money, and the cow immediately reverts to being the Reuven's. Since it's not a normal case, we go back to the Torah law that Mos is konos, that money can actually affect the transaction. That will be the Mishnah according to Rav Nachman. According to Rav Nachman, the Mishnah would be saying that there's a case where money can work like chalipin. Even though we hold that Mos, money, usually doesn't work like chalipin, it doesn't affect the transaction, there is a case where it could work, and that is, the example of the Mishnah was, you trade a donkey, an ox for a cow. The case is you sell the ox, and then instead of paying money, you trade a cow for it. But the money gets traded for the cow, and therefore the cow can immediately revert to the one who gave the ox. So that's according to Rav Nachman how the Mishnah could be read. Says the Gemara, that only works within the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan holds that according to the Torah, ma'os konos. According to the Torah, money can affect the transaction. The rabbis came along and said money does not affect the transaction, only mashicha, only pulling does. And therefore, we're able to say, but in certain situations we revert back to the Torah law that money affects the transaction. That's what the Mishnah is saying. But according to Reish Lakish, the Amar Meshicha Mefereshes Minat Torah, according to Reish Lakish, who disagrees with Rabbi Yochanan, he says no, Meshicha is explicit in the Torah. The acquisition that the Torah talks about is pulling an object towards you. Money does not require, according to the Torah. And therefore, money never requires. Not when it's a common case, not when it's an abnormal case. It won't make a difference. Money does not create an acquisition. So how is he going to explain this Mishnah? Hanicha yisavar lak Rav Sheshes. So it would make sense if he holds like Rav Sheshes to Amar Peiros Abdi Chalipin, who holds that Peiros, that fruit, non-kalim, non-vessels could be used for Chalipin. Mitayas Rav Sheshes. He'll learn the Mishnah like Rav Sheshes, like we originally tried to say. That the Mishnah was saying that money could be used, and Peiros, fruit, and animals, everything could be used for Chalipin. That's how Rav Sheshes learned it. But if Reish Lakish holds like Rav Nachman the Amar, who said Peiros lo abdi Chalipin, that you can't use fruit, you can't use regular metaltal movable objects for Chalipin, only vessels. Umatbea lo kani, and therefore you can't say that a matbea, that currency works either. None of it can work. Currency can't work, animals can't work. B'may mukila. How is he going to learn this Mishnah? How will Reish Lakish learn this Mishnah? So the Gemara says, Al karchach Rav Sheshes svirle. The only way to explain it is that he holds like Rav Sheshes. It can't be that he holds like Reb Nachman. In order for Reish Lakish to explain the Mishnah, since he can't reread the Mishnah to be talking about where Ma'os are actually making the kinyan, where it's actually a kinyan through money, because he doesn't hold a Ma'os Konos, only Rabbi Yochanan does. So he can't reread the Mishnah that way. So he has to read it sort of the simple way. But in order to read it the simple way, you have to be able to agree that currency and peiros and fruit and things can be used in a kinyan chalipin. So therefore, you have to say, Reish Lakish would have to hold like Rav Sheshes. He cannot hold like Rav Nachman, who holds that peiros, that fruit, and metaltalin, and money cannot be used for chalipin. He cannot hold, Reish Lakish cannot hold like Rav Nachman, otherwise there would not be a way for him to read the Mishnah.